This is Taking the Lead, a podcast for B2B tech professionals, leaders, and executives who want to learn from female icons in the tech industry. In each episode, host Christina Brady interviews women who are driving revenue for some of the most respected tech companies in the world. Are you ready to get inspired?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Taking the Lead. I am Christina Brady, and I am so excited today to have the absolutely incredible, it's an understatement, the absolutely incredible Sam McKenna on the show today. Sam, welcome.
Thank you for having me. You're so sweet. I can't wait to dive into all the things today.
We're gonna dig in, and I'm just gonna use this entire episode to force you to tell every aspect of your story. So buckle up. Here we go. And that being said,
let's dig in.
You have an incredible story. You're a female founder. You've been ultimately so successful in so many of the things that you've done. And I think your decisions are ones that people would love to learn more about and the courage behind them. So to kick us off, just tell us a little bit about your professional journey and how you got where you are.
It's funny. I think just like everybody else, I fell into sales when I moved to DC after a couple of years abroad after college and got offered a role as a recruiter. And then that didn't seem like a great fit for me. But then I got offered a job in sales. And my first inclination was, like, sales is so grimy, so manipulative. And I was like, I don't want to hustle people into buying my stuff so I can pay my rent or my mortgage. It just seems gross. But I ended up taking the job as an account manager and quickly learned how amazing sales is, because you aren't hustling and grinding and getting all these people to do things. You're actually helping them and you're solving challenges. And I think as soon as I really flipped my switch to think about that and change my lens, all bets were off. So I know for me, one of the things I always wanted to do was create a brand that I was really proud of as a seller, right? I didn't want to come across as that overly aggressive, push you into closing the deal, by the end of the quarter person. And so I just started to think about how I could do that, right? How I could use my upbringing in Switzerland, my upbringing that was focused on manners, how I could use connections to succeed. And then just started doing that. So first 2 years as an account manager, it brought on a ton of clients, but 43 of them were huge law firms. It was a vertical I focused on. Then I got promoted to net new business, which was so scary, by the way. There's nowhere to hide, no existing accounts to expand. Did great there, crushed a bunch of records, won Rep of the Year, got my first President's Club win, and then ultimately got recruited over to a company called On24 out in the Bay Area. Realized I wanted to be a leader, set my sights on that. Eventually got there, became the first person and woman to be promoted from individual contributor to executive ranks, and then eventually went to what I thought was my dream, which was LinkedIn. And it was my dream until, of course, starting my own business. But LinkedIn was like the holy grail. When they recruited me, I was like, I guess. And I was like, oh my God. Inside, I could not believe my good fortune. And then ultimately broke my 13th sales record while I was at LinkedIn and thought, I wonder what I could do on my own, which was the inception of Sam Sales about 3.5 years ago.
Whoa! I could tell you've never done that before. Okay, so many things that I want to dig into. One, did you mention that you grew up in Switzerland?
Yeah, my whole family's European. There's only 2 people in my entire family that were born in the States. But yeah, I was born in Geneva, and then I moved to the States when I was 5, but not speaking a lick of English except for hello and goodbye. I think probably a thank you.
Oh my gosh. And then you've been here since then and had to learn on the fly as a kid.
Yeah. So learned English really quickly. People called me Frenchie. Kids are mean, even in kindergarten. But I did get a lot of marriage proposals, which my mom even had to be called in to have a discussion about why I was getting so many marriage proposals as a kindergartner. I know. I had a crush on a redhead named Michael. Oh, Michael, if you're still out there, what's up?
Michael, Sam would love to see you. Redheaded Michael from her childhood. I got married in first grade to a lovely young man named Eric. Under the willow
Eric
tree.
With a C or a K?
Eric with a C. Eric with a C. Yeah.
Willow tree. How romantic.
I think it was a willow tree. I was in first grade, and in my mind, I was like a willow tree. And we had a very modest wedding.
Low key, inexpensive champagne was served. It was fine.
That's right. All of our friends were there. Family could not make it to the playground that day. But
no, well, I think An interesting thing though was, we moved to the States, we were here, but my mom, so my parents had split up. My dad was running a business out of Switzerland, so he was still outside of Geneva. And my mom ran a business out of Venice. And so probably every 8 to 10 weeks, we were going back to Europe. So I would spend like a week out of school every 8 to 10 weeks. My teachers blew a gasket, particularly in middle school. But it's interesting too, because the education that I got watching my parents run their business, watching my mom schmooze, build relationships, negotiate. It was such an incredible early experience for me in sales, which of course I never knew that was coming, and certainly in entrepreneurship.
I mean, skill comes from all of these different areas that we don't expect, and often also from tenacity. And I can imagine, given the fact that you went back and forth so often in these really early, formidable years, I would imagine that when you tell that story, most people are like, oh, you're so lucky. I would have loved to be able to do that. And absolutely. But I also have to think that from a social aspect, being a kid and leaving that much, that actually had to be kind of difficult.
Especially when I was like in high school. I never wanted to be away from my little boyfriends.
Right. So many weddings.
It was, I know, right? No, it was amazing. I think there was definitely some kicking and screaming that happened in my younger years to keep going back and forth, because I wanted to be with my friends. But looking back, like what an exceptional experience that was. And it's really cool. I've unfortunately lost both of my parents, and getting to go back, I get to wander the streets that we wandered, together, and do all the experiences that we had together. It makes me feel a little bit closer to them when I do get to do those travels.
Oh my gosh. And those are the moments, right? Those of us who have been effectively orphaned in our lives, we find any way to bring it back, right? It's like
100%.
Yeah, I was lucky enough. I was doing a SCO keynote for a wonderful company in the edtech space called N2Y just the other week. And I actually happened to be in Orlando, Florida, in Universal Studios on January 18th, the anniversary of my mom's passing. And that was like our big family trip every year, was like to Orlando to just be careless and just be immersed. And it was this wild moment where I was like, oh my gosh, I'm here today. And so
goosebumps.
I know those moments are meaningful.
I love they got to do that.
Yeah. And speaking of a goosebumps moment for me, when I'm listening to your story, there's no doubt that you have a natural brain where you're very inclined to learning and you're picking things up constantly as you go, which is really hard to teach. This is something I think you can teach, but it's built in for you. Yeah. But even with that, people are going to wonder, how did you get so good at sales where you're hitting these numbers? Like, did you teach yourself? Did you watch other people? Were you just one of those people that you were like, I was born to sell, baby? Like, what did you do to really hone and improve your craft?
I think as soon as I started to see a little early success, it got really addicting, right? Not only from the perspective of I love that sales, like your unique values and skill set and all of that, can significantly change the money that you earn. And so I started to see that, right? And really be motivated by that. How could I blow my number out of the water? How could I make money that I never thought, right? Even when I was younger, my whole thought was, I'm going to make six figures by the time I'm 30. And I think I did it 1 month shy of that. People are doing that now. 23 and 24-year-old SDRs are making hundreds of thousands of dollars, just being smart about the way they're doing things. But it took me a little longer to get there. But I think for me, as soon as I started to see early success, I did what I think it resonates with a lot of top performers. And I thought about, okay, I learned this, what foundations can I set? How can I make sure that I'm learning everything that I possibly can at the foundational level? How do I really nail this? And then how do I keep growing from there? I was super, super fortunate to have a few leaders in our organization. I worked for a very small company where I had 25 million or so in annual revenue. There was nothing to us. But oddly, we had some really heavy hitters from Dun & Bradstreet that had come over to try and run this company. And so I took everything that I could from them, right? These were seasoned sellers. They were C-suites and executives that actually knew how to sell, which frankly, I find is rare these days to find a leader that knows how to do it, right? You've got all the operational leaders, here's your dashboard, here's your KPIs, and how to sell. And so I just dug in. I got Jeffrey Gitmer's Little Red Book of Selling, which is still on my credenza over here. My husband at the time was like, we're on vacation, you can't read your book. And I was like, okay, your workbook. And so I went into the bathroom, pretended to take a bath, and just read my book to try and learn as much as I possibly could. I was so excited. And it just went from there. I started to also test. So I tested a ton of things, right? How do I use relationships? How do I use smarter messaging? How do I, what works? Why did that work? And then how do I replicate it? And I'll tell you too, one quick story here, very early days of social selling, when I got promoted into my AE role, I was able to take 3 accounts with me. And that was 3 accounts that weren't assigned to people, that were existing customers, had just gone through a whole transition. And I looked to see where our white space was. And I found, this is where the law firm piece started. I found that we had 3 of the most successful law firms in the world working with us, right? Massive, massive firms. So I reached out to all of them. I took those accounts, reached out to all of them, found the CMOs, and interviewed them and said, why us? We're a tiny company. You could work with Cisco, you could work with WebEx, GoToMeeting, whatever. Why us? Took that information and then ran with it. But one of the CMOs said, why don't you look through my LinkedIn network? Anybody that you want a meeting with, who's a Hall of Famer, really well-recognized CMO. And he's like, look through my LinkedIn network and see if there's anybody that you know or that I know that you want to get in front of, and then just go for it. So I literally did that. I sat in Richmond, Virginia overnight in our office, and I went through every single person in his network, and I sent emails. And I literally said in my subject line, hello, show me you know me. I said, a webinar inquiry from a friend of Jim Durham's. And the responses were off the charts. People are like, well, if Jim vouches for you, I'll take a meeting with you. And I was like, what? And it was amazing, right? The power of a network, the power of social selling, the power of using that data early days.
Oh my gosh. I love this. Like the way that you took all of the pieces and then put them together to create personalization. Before, I feel like creating personalization was a methodology, was a whole thing. Yeah. You were doing it, which doesn't surprise me given where you ended up.
Well, I think the thing about that too, like thinking about your brand, right? So I think that that's something we've really built, like I've built for myself, but also at Sam Sales, that there are, you think of these kind of like gimmicky practices in sales. And I think people would say like, you'll never catch Sam Sales doing that. You'll never catch Sam Sales advocating for that. And I think that that was part of what I wanted to build as a brand, as a seller. When I looked at the stuff that was out there, right, the outreach that we were getting, the practices people were doing on their calls, even just hearing peers of mine, I was like, ugh, like I feel like the bar is so low because so many people learn just the wrong way to do things, right? Make 13 touches to this one same contact in 1 week. Like, my God, why would you do that, right? Or build 3x pipeline instead of 5x pipeline so you can be lazier and then you just push those people into buying your stuff. Oh my gosh, just all these things. So I wanted to think about how do I build a brand that really reflects who I am, that puts me at a higher level, that differentiates me from other sellers, and how do I build that landscape? And I will say too, on top of that, building that brand also built me trust with higher and more senior executives, which then got me referrals. Because a C-suite, a CMO, a CRO, right, is going to think like, I'm not going to refer this person that's called me 17 times today. I'm going to refer this person that adds value, that wrote a personalized email, that seems smart, that connected me with people, because that's my level, right? So even as a baby AE, how can I bring executive presence to an engagement so they will refer me?
Oh, I mean, that's an entire methodology in and of itself. And I feel like you were and then could have continued to be this incredible career individual contributor salesperson, probably pulling in millions a year, selling the big deals. But no, instead you say, I'm really, really, really good at this job. But instead of continuing to do this job, I'm going to be a sales leader because sales leadership is calling. And we know that even some of the best sales leaders, their top reps, outperform them in terms of what they're bringing in from an on-target earning standpoint. So what made you go from saying, I'm really good at this, I'm building methodologies, I'm trailblazing what will wind up being the way, 10 years from now, and instead say, and now I'm going to go into leadership? What prompted that move?
I will say before I say that I am highly, highly motivated by money. So I just like candidly will say that, right? That is part of like, announce a spiff, do all of that. Like I'm here for it. Despite that, right, there's really no greater joy than knowing I could teach someone how to do something, that they could implement it, and then they could succeed. The feeling to me is unparalleled to so many things in life. And when I started to do some of these practices, again, really early days in my selling career, I would have my boss, my boss's boss, my C-suite, whatever, that would come and say like, how are you being so successful? How did you book 7 meetings this week? How are you doing this? We never thought to do whatever it is I told them I did. And it got me thinking like, oh, well, this seems so obvious to me. That's actually where Sam Sales started, because I started posting my tips and tricks in 2011 on LinkedIn, and then eventually thought, well, maybe I'll post more than one. I'll create a hashtag, I guess. And as creative as I am, it's my name plus what I do for a living. So there you go. Yeah. But I think for me, just that feeling, right? Like that feeling of seeing somebody else succeed with, a strategy or insight or whatever that I gave them was so great. And I think I just knew myself that I could go into leadership, right? Which is traditionally, especially as a frontline manager, when you take that role, traditionally you do make less money than you did as an IC or that some of the direct reports you have. I knew though, knowing myself, knowing how I could help, knowing how I could shotgun deals, that I could probably go into that leadership role, still make more money than I did before, and make a greater impact, right? And scaling what I did really well to other people on our team. And that's exactly what happened. In the last 12 years, I have not made less money than the previous year. So I continued to go up, right? And I'm like desperately chasing to see if that'll keep up this year. But I think even one year it was like $1,000 more. But it doesn't matter. It was more.
It's more. Directionally.
That feeling was amazing. I will say too, like I was in the same boat that a lot of people are in, that once they become a top performer and your company relies on you for your revenue, it can be hard to convince them to let that revenue go and put you into leadership. And that is definitely an uphill battle that I faced for probably 18 months until I got promoted.
Oh my gosh. I hear folks ask that question all the time where they say, our top performers want to go into leadership, but the business can't afford to not have them in that seat. And if you keep people there for too long, you're inviting them to leave your organization because ultimately you're going to lose them anyway. You can't plug up people's careers by saying, we unfortunately need to keep you into what feels like an earlier step in your career, because the business, you've performed yourself into a corner where you're too good for us to let you go. We want to promote you, but we can't, but keep performing while you're there. Or what? You'll go in a pip, you'll leave. I mean, so it's this impossible place. You dealt with that for 18 months?
18 months, yeah. And also what a fantastic red flag for an organization, by the way. If you were relying on 5 to 10% of your organization, right, of your sales team to bring in most of the revenue, right, you're in trouble. There's something wrong there. They either have territories that are isolated just for them and they're the only top performers or whatever, but the red flag there. Yeah, 18 months. So, and I think just a good lesson for me there as well. I ended up being offered a promotion then it was at the end of the year. So we had to finish the end of the year out, and then I was going to start and get my very first promotion to leadership. And then my leader that had given me the promotion was terminated before the end of the year, around November. And of course, I didn't get it in writing. And so by the time the next year came around, and by the time I could get attention, this is an interesting story, but by the time I could get the attention of my head of sales to talk about that leadership role, it was like late March. And by that, actually, I'm lying to you, it was early April. And by that time, instead of being 100% of quota for the year, I was currently at 43% of quota for the year. So I was not doing great that first quarter. And his response to me was, I can't promote you. Like, how can I promote somebody that's at 43% of quota? And I was like, I already earned this promotion, right? I earned it last year, et cetera. Didn't get it. And I think just a good story to say that I ended up that year winning rep of the year. So by early April, being so significantly behind quota, I just punched the gas, and I figured out how I was going to do it. I did my quota math. I worked my way backwards. I didn't rely on inbound leads, any of that. I just figured out how to source my own leads, go to conferences, meetings, etc., and then crushed it. And then by that, I was October 31st that I got the email that said, I was on vacation, in fact, that said, we're gonna promote you and start to source a candidate, which is how I hired my very first person and moved on from there. But yeah, it took some time.
Oh my gosh. If you were to go back and find a way to rework that scenario, even if it looks at it from like an advice standpoint, what do you think would have been the right way to approach that entire situation? Because other folks find themselves probably in a boat similar to that. And I don't think anyone knows exactly like, what is the right way to handle something like this? So in your opinion, did that go the way it should have? Or do you feel like there's a way we could have done better?
I think that one, I should have just gotten it in writing. And I think women especially, but a lot of people are reticent to get those things in writing, whatever it is, or even when they have, tricky interactions back and forth with a leader, they don't want to put it in writing because there's something about it that says, I don't trust you, or, this rubbed me the wrong way, so I'm going to put it in writing. Put it in writing, right? A friend of mine recently got a massive account pulled from her in her territory, given to someone who just came in from that account to their company. And the leader said, we just don't think that you can handle it. So we're going to give it to somebody else who has that experience. And I'm like, you need to put this in writing. They're trying to get rid of you, right? Like, so there's a lot of emotions, but she's not doing it. And I'm like, do it. So what I would say, for that leadership thing, especially, just say, I'm so honored. Like, thank you so much. Right. I just want to put together, I'm going to send you an email with these details. I want to also understand a roadmap so I can close out my territory, think about hiring, start to maybe work with recruiting on that. There's logic of why you're putting in writing. So that's what I would do. I would say the other thing, some of you guys listening might be thinking like, you should have quit. Oh my God, move on to the next thing. And I think that can be a quick, emotional reaction. But what I would say too is even if you're in that same boat as me, is there still something that you're getting out of this organization that really benefits you, right? Like, do you have a great year carved out ahead of you? Are you learning effectively? Do you get to participate in programs or lead things that still fulfill you, right? And I got to do a lot of that leading. I created our culture program. I created our mentorship program. There was still an unbelievable amount of joy for me in working for that organization in spite of that. So I think those are the questions, right? Don't just go because you're pissed, because I was definitely pissed. But go if none of those other things are being met. Otherwise, right, see what you can find that still benefits you to keep growing, keep making money, and then eventually pivot.
Yes. It's phenomenal advice to, in those moments, tie the need to a larger business case around there's a shift that's coming. I don't need it in writing because I don't trust you. Because to your point, that's how it comes across. Like, okay, but could you put that in writing? It's, I want to build a business plan to do my diligence so that you, me, and the larger org are aware of how this transition is going to look. There's no questions. There's no surprises. You almost flip that to then act like you're already in the role and thinking like a leader in that instance. So it's phenomenal advice. And yes, women, folks, everybody, it is okay to be money motivated. You mentioned that earlier, and I wanted to say that being money motivated is an okay thing. We're not volunteers, and we can say like, hey, I'm in this to make a lot of money. Get your money, right?
Yeah.
That's great. Absolutely. And the gender disparity here around the guilt that we feel around getting things in writing or being firm with something. Yeah. We're often asked to just trust so much more often. And then when it bites you, it's left feeling so bitter.
I will tell you too that you're so right? So the people that we even like, I'll coach on the side to say like, here's how you negotiate your comp plan, and a lot of women will come back and just say like, I'm nervous. Like, what if they think that I'm selfish? I'm like, what if you don't negotiate your comp plan? Let's say somebody offers you 150, and then when you get in, you find out that the top of the pay band for someone like you is 200. You're going to be pissed that you didn't negotiate. But I'll tell you just like on that topic, right? So I had received when I had received my raise after winning. I had won second place one of the years, and I lost only to a renewals manager, which really isn't a fair fight as a net new enterprise rep. But anyhow, I had won that second place. I got a $30,000 raise, 15 and 15 in OTE. And then the next year, I won rep of the year. I created 2 programs. I finished it at even higher percentage than my previous year. And I think I got there faster than anyone had before. Like early September, I'd hit my quota for the year. And that was a record that I broke at that company. But the next year I got that same raise, $30,000. And I remember saying to my boss, I was like, and he's like, And I was like, well, it's the same raise you gave me last year. And I accomplished so much more, so much faster, right? Had that argument. And so I remember him saying, give me until June. Let's see how the first 2 quarters happen of the year. And then let's see if I can add another $5,000. I was stoked. I was like, okay, great. Like another 5,000, that'll be great. Went to President's Club that year, met with one of my male peers who said he had gotten a $60,000 raise and had not done what I had done in terms of programs, had not accomplished what I had accomplished in terms of revenue. I blew a gasket, of course, because that's who I am. I blew a gasket, wrote an email on my way home, right? And then I went and I made a pitch and I said, I am such a consistent top performer. I go above and beyond all the time. Here's my value to the organization beyond the revenue that I bring in, yada, yada, yada. And this is what I want. So I ended up in that 6-month period negotiating a $95,000 total raise. But I wouldn't have done it. So just shout out to my male counterpart there. I wouldn't have done it had somebody on the other side not looked out for me, right? Had somebody not trusted me and given me that information. And I think it's a really important lesson too, just like in building relationships internally, looking out for one another, shining a light on other people, right? But I'm eternally grateful for that because I would have taken the $5,000 and been a happy clam instead of fought for more.
And this is why pay transparency needs to be a very, very regular thing. I had a similar experience, years ago at a prior company. I won't name it, but years ago at a prior company, I was one of the top performing sales managers in the org. I was also one of the more tenured, and my OTE at the time was 65. So I was at 130. And I had been at 130 for a long time. There was no additional raises. They had basically just done extra spiffs for you to achieve above that. But I wanted more money in the base. I wanted more money in the OTE. I was more tenured. My performance spoke for itself. And so I did the original pitch and went to HR and I said, this is my performance. I've pulled some comparative data on what folks in my position with my experience would be making. Here's where I think that I should be. And they said, we just don't have the budget right now for any raises. And if we give you a raise, this is what they said that really wound up making me, I don't like to get angry a lot, but angry later. Right? Like, as anger, unless you do something with it, it really just takes years off of your life, right? But she said, if we give you a raise, we have to give everybody a raise. And I went, okay. And in my mind, that made me think, well, then I guess all of us are on the same level. And if so, that makes sense, right? I've worked at companies before where they say everybody is on the same level. Everything is transparent. So if we give you a raise, we have to give everybody a raise. Fair. But I thought, okay, got it. And then I said, well, if it's not now, this is something that I'm looking for. When? She said, well, check back in a couple of months. I said, okay. So I check back in a couple of months. Performance is still great. And I say, how about that additional money? She says, unfortunately, we don't have it. We can't give it to everybody. There's so many more managers now. And I just played this game for a while. Well, just like you, I go on a president's club and I speak with a male manager that had about probably 70% fewer reps than I did because he was an outside sales manager. And I found out that in total earnings, he was making $100,000 more than me, 60 of that in the base. So his base equaled my entire on-target earning. He had fewer people, a lower target, lower attainment.
Oh my God.
And just like you thanked your friend, my gosh, this individual, because I wasn't upset at him. Great that you got your money. But I said, oh my God, how did you wind up negotiating that kind of an offer coming in? And he said, well, he goes, I know the CEO. And so this was just the offer that they gave to me. And the fact that it was, we'd have to give everybody a raise. It was this moment where I forever lost trust in that organization and I left.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, and I think, everyone listening, I'm sure has an identical story. And no matter what level you are, how senior you are, what gender you are, no matter that, you have this story because it seems to have happened to so many of us. But I will say too, right, to that light bulb moment for an organization, think about that, right? A top performer like you, who has probably stayed there consistently, just think about what the loss of that revenue would be. And the thing to think about, right, too, is if they know you are underpaid, right, if you're at that 130 mark, and let's say they know that they're going to have to bring in somebody at 160, 170, 180, whatever, not to mention that that person's ramp, the possible recruiting fees, there's so much that goes into replacing just one person, right? Think about what that would do also if you, one, give them the money, but then two, proactively thought about that. One of my favorite things to do is give a proactive, unexpected raise to someone who's deserving, because honestly, as you start to pile that on and then benefits, those people are never going to leave you. If they're learning and if they're making a ton of money and they feel appreciated, I mean, what a great way to protect your own revenue and culture as an organization.
Yes, creating the loyalty. And my gosh, Sam, speaking of an irreplaceable loss, here you are. I'm going to bring it back to you now.
Bye.
You're working for these incredible brands. You're being promoted into top seller roles. You're nailing them. You're going to President's Club. You finally earn the leadership seat after sitting on your hands and white knuckling and performing for 18 months. You finally get in that seat. You're there. And then you go to start your own firm. And you're like, you know what? Now that I've done that, tell us about that. I know that folks want to hear also a little bit about what you do because you're such an incredible presence and knowing where you come from and the value you provide. Let's start with just that moment of you saying, and it probably wasn't a moment. It was probably multiple times of thinking, I want to do it, but then you decide to do it and you leave. Tell us.
I think even just transitioning out of On24 to go to LinkedIn was a tough decision. I loved my team. You know, one of your employees was on my team, just loved the team that I had there. And it was a really tough decision, but it was an easy one because I was going to a company that I lived and breathed and bled for, for so many years. Loved the idea of LinkedIn. I think when finally that 13 sales record came around there, and I had been traveling, every single week, right? Since the second week of January through whenever, always on the road. I just started to think about, I'm consistently successful across 3 different companies that I've been loyal to for the last 12 years. I know I can do this. I wonder what kind of impact I can make if I don't work for a company, right? But instead I work for my own and I support 3 or 4 different clients, right? And that was the goal of starting Sam Sales. One, I was not going to do anything from the end of August until January of 2020. That was my goal. Just sit on my butt, read, hang out with my dogs. Didn't work. That flew out the window after about a week. But I was also I was going to work part-time and I was going to make half the money I made in SaaS and be totally okay with that. And just get to impact different companies. So we've been around for 3.5 years. We have an all-women team of 11, over 160 clients. We do quite a bit of work all around, but I think it's been such a dream to get to do this. And it was, as you can tell, despite me being so financially motivated, it wasn't financially motivated. This decision was to make impact. I was lucky to have a few of my old clients out of the gate say, like, we have no idea what we're doing with sales. Would you come and advise? And I was like, sure. And all the problems they had the solutions to their problems was like breathing to me, right? Setting up a sales process, creating that scalable, repeatable process, building a tech stack, all of that stuff, all that go-to-market stuff that any organization needs as they get started. And then we just grew from there. We grew from client demand, people saying we need help with BDRs, we need help with sequencing. People open up our emails, but they don't respond. And we're like, it's because your emails are terrible. We'll rewrite them, and it just grew from there. And it's been such a joy. It is harder work than I've ever done in my life, but the most rewarding you can imagine.
And there's so much that you do, and it is so needed because there's a lot of really fluffy content that exists, right? That is aiming to solve the problems of go to market. And then you get in there and it almost, a lot of the content that we see is just sort of reframing the issue and talking about why it's an issue. And you leave going, but what do I do about it? And coming personally from digesting your content for the last 2.5 years, you really hit it hard. And so you just have this familiarity with what people need to go be better right now. And it comes from a combination of you and your experience.
Yeah. And I think, the conversations we have with our clients are probably the same every single time, right? They need the same things. They have the same challenges. A lot of it to me just always comes back to the foundations of selling. And we have, I think there's so many great sales methodologies out there. I'm a personal lover of Challenger. I think it is the best one out there that I found. But the thing about those methodologies, right, a lot of the times is that they're the bricks, what we call the bricks of your sales process. And what we say Sam Sales is the mortar. It's the nitty gritty. It's all those daily, right, interactions, those levers to pull, those things to do, right? Like, what do you do how do you write a great message on LinkedIn? What do you do when somebody says they want to meet with you and they ghost? What do you do when somebody says, somebody's presenting to the board to get approval on us and then we're moving forward? What are all those little things that you don't know to ask, you don't think of, et cetera? It's great to uncover BANT. It's great to think about spin selling, but how do you do that? How do you say, who's the decision maker? How much budget do you have? What need? How do you actually say those things? And that's what we teach. And I love it because to your point, I spoke at a conference over the summer. And after the conference, I got all these emails from people on LinkedIn who said, yours is the only session. In fact, Christina, I gave the same leadership presentation that I gave at Sales Assembly about how to be a great leader. Yeah, thanks.
Good.
But people said yours is the only session that I learned something of like how to do something. And I just don't understand. I don't understand how you give a training that doesn't actually teach a how, but just teaches theory. Like I like that would be the toughest thing for me to do, just to teach the theory. So I think that's what's missing. And that's what I love to do, right? It's not be in front of your clients more, work smarter. It's here's exactly how to be in front of your clients more, what to say, what to write, what medium to use, the timing to do it. That's what we teach. It's not the theoretical.
And that is what actually allows people to grow and perform in their roles is, I can learn what I need to do in a lot of different places, but how I do it, that secret sauce is incredible. And last big thing I have for you before we get to it, although I could tell there was something you wanted to hit on right there.
No, you go.
You sure? Because a big breath in, I'm like, I'm not going to cut that off. Something amazing is going to come out of your mouth. You sure?
I'll say the only thing to think about with your learners, right? The people that you're putting through this is that when we bring a sales methodology in, I think what seems overwhelming about a methodology is it's a 98-point step process that you have to follow. And what's different, I think, about us, right? We'll teach you 10 things in an hour, but you can literally take 2 of those things, test them, see that they work, and then you're like, oh shit, it worked. And we're like, we know, go do it again, right? Even, I'll say this one thing, at a sales kickoff we did last year in Vegas, we had hundreds of attendees, and one of the guys left, and he's like, show me you know me, and perfect discovery call, which is what we 2 of us taught it. And he's like, that stuff doesn't work. But he's like, you know what? I'm going to try it. And so he tried it. He tried show me you know me with somebody who had ghosted him for 6 months. And he listened to a podcast. He pulled out a quote she said. He put it in the subject line. She responded in 10 minutes, and booked the meeting. And then he's like, what the hell just happened? He did it again with 3 other things that had ghosted him. It worked. And he sent his leadership and us an email. He's now on our website as a quote. And he's like, I got to tell you, he's like, I thought this was a bunch of BS. I tried it. I'm a convert. I will do anything you say. And we're like, oh, okay.
Yes. Yes.
It just, right. Just takes that one, just try one thing differently. Try one thing we teach you. Try one thing I post about on LinkedIn, and you will see how I can change the game for you.
Oh, you can, and you do. See, I'm glad that I let you say that, because that was also really good. And this is what feels like a simple question.
Yeah.
It's a difficult one, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Given the insight that you have into so many of these growing startup, mature startups, I mean, you're everywhere, and your content really does sort of bend and flex. What do you think are the biggest gaps that you see in sales right now? Like, what are people consistently just missing?
People don't know how to human. Like, they don't know how to people. And you have to think about this too in generational gaps. If we're talking about someone who's like 34, 35 years of age and under, that generation communicates in a completely different way than, let's say, my generation. I'm 41, but thinking about that, right? You look at those generational gaps. The younger individuals, they talk at each other. So they don't ask questions. They don't actively listen for the most part, right? I'm stereotyping here, but this is the communication style of younger people. So when you think about that, we're asking them to go and ask questions, to dig in, to think about the question behind the question, to pull a thread on a question that they get asked, to listen to an answer and ask a question on top of that. It's a completely different communication style than what they're used to, and we just expect them to be able to do it. So we have to teach them how to do that, how to have a conversation. I think it's also for people, a lot of people don't know how to digitally sell, even though we've been doing this for quite a few years now, right? So if I'm meeting with you, Christina, super scary and intimidating SVP of sales at Speckett, is it okay for me to say something about like your cool hair color, or your octopus in the background, or your drawings, or your perhaps willow tree that you were married under in first grade behind you, right? This is the tree. You held it for so long.
I held on to it.
But even just teaching that it's okay to do that. It's okay to leverage information on the person's LinkedIn. We need to focus on that, because I'll tell you, our buyers, number one, they're looking for active listeners. That's the number one thing Gartner says that they're looking for, or Forrester rather. And then number two, they just want somebody that actually knows how to have a human conversation and gives a shit about them. So that's the biggest thing I say that's missing, amongst 100 other things.
Okay, well, that was a really good answer. And when you talk about generational gaps, I know this is something that you talk about, and I do too. I wind up doing a lot of trainings for companies where we talk about how do people communicate generationally. And then when you work at a company where you have people from 3-4 generations all merged together, you'll probably have a lot of conflict because you don't understand the generational gaps. Like the one that you said, maybe we'll call it like 33 and under. A lot of times enthusiasm shows up as interruption, and it's not meant to be rude. It's meant to show the enthusiasm. But, me in the plus 35 box, if I'm talking about something passionately and you interrupt me, I'm like, but okay, Isaiah, it's your turn now. Like, you have the talking stick. I don't know, right? And they're like, talking stick, what do you mean? I'm like, never mind. It was a camp thing. So it's just like, there are these generational gaps that we do have to keep in mind. And then we have to find a way to human with that human where they are right now, with the experience they have and the generation they're in and how they interpret messaging. It's so much harder than it looks. You need help with that. You do. Like,
completely.
Absolutely.
I think that a lot of organizations also struggle with how to train organizations of that size. But what I would tell you is you need to more think about the foundations of sales versus the tenure of somebody. Because somebody who has been selling for 25 or 30 years, perhaps they're a fantastic seller, but perhaps they don't know how to social sell. They don't know what digital selling is. They don't know how to show up if they need to turn their camera on. They might not even know how the hell to write a great outbound email. So just think about that too, right? No matter the tenure, right? The majority of your organization could benefit from those foundations, from writing, from, again, showing up in a digital way. So don't let that tenure get in your way when you think about enablement and what they really need.
Yes. Bam. And this brings us, sadly, because I feel like I have so many more things I wanted to talk to you about, because you're all just going to have to connect with Sam individually and take up all of her time, because I'm telling you, she's fascinating. But we're going to bring out a little bit of the person with our rapid reveal section, if you are up for that.
Let's do it. Oh, man.
All right. We've got 3 questions. You have 60 seconds or less to answer each. And it's just to help the audience get to know a little bit more about how you think. Although this was a great session where I feel like we already know that, and yet we're going to do more. So number 1, what was the last advice that you received?
Last advice I received, I think one of the most impactful pieces of advice I've received too is your greatest joy is on the other side of fear. And I think about that, like, let's even think about that for starting a business, right? Terrifying. You as a salesperson, you are no longer selling a product. I'm not selling on 24 or LinkedIn or Navigator. I'm selling Sam. And when somebody says no, they're saying no to me. They don't want me, right? And so that's scary as shit. But I think, take those leaps, right? Be intentional. I am very, very intentional and calculated. I am not impulsive unless I'm hungry and at the checkout line. But other than that, right, take that leap, because I think you'll find, right, as you consider things, starting a family, taking a leadership role, creating a company, let go of that fear and just leap in. One life to live, depending on what you believe.
Leap in, one life to live, and no time to waste. Love it. Number 2, what is an irrational fear of yours?
Oh my gosh. So, okay. This is really strange, but I make a lot of hard-boiled eggs. I love hard-boiled eggs. My husband hates them, and every time I make them, he's like, gross. But I have to carry my little pot of piping hot boiling water, whatever it is, pasta, from the stove to the sink, which is 10 whopping feet. But my dogs, probably much like everybody's dogs listening, are always underfoot. And I am terrified that I'm going to trip and I'm going to spill. I have this irrational fear. I'm going to drop a huge knife on them. I always carefully carry it. I also have this weird fear when I come downstairs in my house in the middle of the night to get a glass of water that Jason Voorhees is going to be standing. Does anybody remember Talk About Camp?
Obviously.
Jason Voorhees is going to be standing in my front yard. I'm going to look out the window and it's going to go, duh! And then I'm going to see him and I'll be like, oh my God. And then I'm going to get murdered. So little window into the mind of Sam.
I love it. And I would say the first one, not that irrational. The second one, this is why I ask that question. Because you're like, I shouldn't be afraid of that. I don't look in the corner when it's dark out, in my house, because I'm if I look in the corner, I'm going to see something
oh yeah,
a creepy thing up in. So when it's dark in my house, I look at the floor or I look straight ahead. I will not look in a dark room up in the corner.
No,
it's completely irrational. Someone's going to be up there.
I used to watch Unsolved Mysteries by myself in my house in Florida with a glass room on the backside. And I was convinced that the murderer that they were featuring was always all 6 of them were behind me, watching me through the window. Anyway,
they're in your house. They're waiting for you. We might have a little bit of the same brain in that sense. All right. Number 3. I love asking you this because you teach so many others so many things. But what is something that you've always wanted to learn how to do that you haven't done yet?
I think my biggest goal, honestly, is French was my first language, as I mentioned to you guys. And I know how to speak it. I don't know how to read and write in it very well. I can read it. I cannot write it to save my life. Forget it. I would love to do that. I would also love to learn how to make cheese. If you have followed me for any time, you know that I am obsessed with cheese. I think I usually have 11 or 12 varieties of it in my fridge at all times. It is sad. I think I would weigh 400 pounds less if I ate less of it. But I didn't have an addiction to it. I'd love to learn that. I'd also love to learn to be a better writer. I think the way I write is a lot of instinct, and just I know why that works, but I can't tell you why that works. So when people are like, "Oh, the subject is defining the verb of here," I'm like, "No, I don't know what that means," but cool. So I'd love to just learn, not on gut, but actually by pure nerdery. 3. I gave you 3. Always a long-winded answer with me.
Yes. You remember that show Conjunction Junction?
Yes. Oh my gosh.
I should have watched that more because I feel like, what's your function? I feel like that like randomly came on for some reason. My son got into like a deep dark hole of YouTube where he threw himself into the 80s, and I was like, and I saw it come up, and they were talking about things that I was like, I'm talking about conjugation. I was like, what? I mean, I feel like we should have watched that more. That being said,
I don't know why you just made me think now of I'm Just a Bill on Capitol Hill. We had a lot of rhymes as a kid.
We did. And yet here we are, and we're like, I can't write. So it should have stuck more. But with that, this has been a wonderful conversation. I imagine that folks are going to want to connect with you, talk with you. Where can we find Sam McKenna?
Say hello on LinkedIn, come to samsalesconsulting.com, sign up for our newsletter. Paige on our team does a really good job of consolidating our tips, and it's really funny to boot every Friday. And we have webinars, we have women's leadership groups, we have all kinds of things. So come and hang out. We try to give as much as we possibly can away for free.
Oh, you hit me in the heart with a mention of Paige. She is incredible. And the women's leadership groups, I know. Yeah. We could gush on all your employees. You've done a phenomenal job building a team.
They're pretty spiffy. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and we will see all of you again next time.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Taking the Lead. If you're looking for more inspiring stories from women leaders in B2B tech, then visit us at motionagency.io/takingthelead.